I've always been a bit of a thrill seeker, chasing that rush of adrenaline wherever I could find it. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that summer night at Twilight Park. It's been months since then, but the memories still haunt me, turning my once-cherished childhood haven into a source of nightmares. This is the story of how a simple nostalgic visit became the most terrifying experience of my life. It was a sweltering summer evening when I decided to revisit Twilight Park, the old amusement park on the outskirts of town. I hadn't been there in years, not since I was a kid, really. The decision was spontaneous, driven by a mix of nostalgia and boredom. As I drove down the familiar winding road, memories of cotton candy, carousel rides, and my parents' laughter flooded back. The sun was setting as I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. Something felt off right from the start. The cheerful jingles and excited screams that once filled the air were noticeably absent. Instead, an eerie silence hung over the place, broken only by the occasional creak of metal or distant, muffled thump. As I approached the entrance, my excitement gave way to unease. The once vibrant paint on the welcome sign was now peeling and faded, and the cheerful cartoon characters that used to greet visitors looked more like grimacing specters in the twilight. The rusted gates groaned as I pushed them open, the sound echoing ominously through the empty park. Inside, the deterioration was even more apparent. The merry-go-round stood still, its horses frozen mid-gallop, their painted eyes seeming to follow me as I walked past. The Ferris wheel loomed against the darkening sky, its silhouette more menacing than inviting. Discarded ticket stubs and empty popcorn containers skittered across the ground in the warm breeze. I told myself it was just the nostalgia playing tricks on me, that the park couldn't possibly be as magical as I remembered. But deep down, I knew this was something else entirely. The Twilight Park of my childhood had been full of life and laughter. This place felt wrong. Abandoned, yet not quite empty. As I ventured deeper into the park, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Eyes seemed to peer at me from the shadows between the dilapidated buildings. I quickened my pace, heading towards the ticket booth. Maybe there was someone there who could explain why the park seemed so deserted on a Saturday night. Little did I know, my encounter at that ticket booth would be the beginning of a nightmare I couldn't have imagined in my wildest dreams. As I approached the ticket booth, my heart nearly stopped. There, behind the grimy glass, sat a figure I hadn't expected to see. A tall, thin man in a faded black suit, his face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. His presence was so out of place in the abandoned park that for a moment, I wondered if I was imagining things. "One ticket, please," I heard myself say, my voice sounding distant and strange to my own ears. The man slowly raised his head, and I felt a chill run down my spine as our eyes met. His were dark, almost black, and seemed to bore right through me. Long, pale fingers reached out, sliding a single ticket across the counter. As I took it, our hands briefly touched, and I had to suppress a shudder. His skin was ice-cold, despite the warm night air. "Enjoy your visit," he said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, yet seemed to echo in my head long after he'd spoken. "Twilight Park has been waiting for you." I mumbled a thanks and quickly stepped away from the booth, my heart pounding. How did he know I'd been here before? And why did it feel like there was a hidden meaning behind his words? Clutching the ticket in my sweaty palm, I turned to face the park's interior. The ride stood silent and still, yet I could have sworn I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. The distant sound of calliope music drifted on the breeze, faint but unmistakable. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. It was just an old park, I told myself. Nothing to be afraid of. But as I started walking down the main path, The ticket booth man's words echoed in my mind. Twilight Park has been waiting for you. Little did I know, my night of terror was only just beginning. As I ventured deeper into Twilight Park, the sense of wrongness grew stronger with each step. The main pathway, once bustling with excited families and giggling children, now stretched before me like a desolate road to nowhere. Street lamps flickered erratically, casting dancing shadows that seemed to reach out towards me. I passed the carousel, its once gleaming horses now dulled and chipped. In the dim light, their fixed grins looked more like snarls, and I could have sworn I saw one of their heads turn to follow me. I quickened my pace, trying to shake off the chill that ran down my spine. The tilt-a-whirl, my favorite ride as a kid, stood silent and still. But as I walked by, I heard a faint creaking sound. I turned to look and froze in shock. The ride was moving ever so slightly, as if someone had just stepped off it. But there was no one there. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding small and frightened in the empty park. No answer came, save for the echo of my own words bouncing back at me from the silent attractions. As I continued my solitary stroll, I noticed other unsettling details. The cotton candy stand had wisps of pink fluff floating around it, as if someone had just spun a batch. The smell of buttered popcorn wafted from an empty concession stand. It was as if the park was alive, operating for an audience that wasn't there. I found myself standing in front of the funhouse, its garish clown face entrance leering down at me. The painted eyes seemed to follow me, and I could have sworn I heard faint, mocking laughter coming from inside. Shaking my head, I turned away, only to come face to face with a hall of mirrors. In the wavering reflections, I saw distorted versions of myself, but also something else. Shadows that moved independently, shapes that shouldn't be there. I blinked hard, and when I looked again, they were gone. My heart was racing now, and I knew I should leave. This wasn't the nostalgic trip down memory lane I had hoped for. It was something else entirely, something wrong and unnatural. But as I turned to head back to the entrance, I realized with a sinking feeling that I was lost. The paths had somehow shifted, and nothing looked familiar anymore. In the distance, I saw the looming structure of the haunted house ride. It stood apart from the other attractions, darker and more foreboding. A chill ran through me as I realized that it might be my only chance to find my way out of this nightmare. With a deep breath, I steeled myself and headed towards it, unaware that I was walking straight into the heart of the terror that awaited me. The haunted house loomed before me, a decrepit Victorian mansion that seemed out of place even in this surreal version of Twilight Park. As a kid, I'd always been too scared to enter, but now, ironically, it seemed like my only hope for answers, or escape. The entrance was a gaping maw of darkness, framed by tattered velvet curtains. A sign hung crookedly above, "Enter at your own risk." As I approached, the floorboards of the porch creaked ominously under my feet. I hesitated at the threshold, my hand hovering over the door handle. Part of me screamed to turn back, to run as far away from this place as possible. But where would I go? The park had become a labyrinth, and this haunted house might be my only way out. Swallowing my fear, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior was pitch black. As my eyes adjusted, I could make out cobweb-covered furniture and dusty portraits on the walls. The air was thick and musty, carrying the scent of decay. I took a cautious step forward, and suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me with a resounding bang. Heart pounding, I fumbled for my phone, using its flashlight to illuminate the way forward. The beam of light danced across the room, revealing grotesque decorations that seemed far too realistic for comfort. A skeletal hand protruded from a grandfather clock, and I could have sworn I saw it twitch. As I moved deeper into the house, the usual haunted house tricks began to play out, but with a terrifying intensity. Ghostly whispers echoed through the halls, too clear and coherent to be recordings. Hidden mechanisms triggered, causing portraits to transform into nightmarish visages that followed me with their eyes. In one room, I found myself surrounded by mirrors. My reflections stared back at me from every angle, but something was off. The reflections moved just a fraction of a second too late, and their expressions didn't quite match my own. As I watched in horror, one of my reflections smiled, a wide, unnatural grin that split its face almost in half. I stumbled backwards, crashing into something solid. Spinning around, I found myself face to face with a mannequin, its blank eyes suddenly alive and filled with malice. I let out a scream and ran, no longer caring about finding my way out, just desperate to escape the horrors surrounding me. Corridors twisted and turned, defying logic and architecture. I found myself in rooms that shouldn't exist, witnessing scenes from my deepest fears played out before me. At one point, I could have sworn I saw my younger self, lost and crying, only to blink and find the child gone. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, I burst through a door and found myself in a circular room. Relief washed over me as I saw an exit sign glowing faintly in the distance. But as I moved towards it, a familiar figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking my path. It was the man from the ticket booth, his hat now removed to reveal a face that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. His eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and his grin was impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "Enjoying the show?" he asked, his voice a rasp that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "But I'm afraid the real fun is just beginning." I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest as I faced the nightmarish figure before me. The man from the ticket booth, if he could even be called a man, blocked the exit, his inhuman grin stretching impossibly wide. "Who? What are you?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely above a whisper. He chuckled, a sound like grinding metal that sent shivers down my spine. "I am the caretaker of Twilight Park, the guardian of forgotten dreams and lost innocence. And you, my dear, are our newest attraction." As he spoke, the room around us began to shift and warp. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. Shadows danced and twisted, taking on monstrous forms that lurked just at the edge of my vision. "This isn't real," I said, trying to convince myself more than anything. "It's just an elaborate trick, special effects." "Oh, but it is real," the creature replied, taking a step towards me. "More real than you can imagine. Twilight Park exists in the space between worlds, feeding on the memories and fears of those who wander into our realm." I backed away, my mind reeling from his words. Could it be true? Had I somehow stumbled into some kind of supernatural nightmare? "Why me?" I asked, desperately searching for a way out of this situation. The creature's eyes glowed with an eerie light. "You came back to us, drawn by your own nostalgia and buried fears. We've been waiting for someone like you, someone whose childhood memories could breathe new life into our park." As he spoke, I saw flashes of my past reflected in the warping walls around us. Distorted versions of my happiest moments at Twilight Park, now twisted into nightmarish scenes. "I won't let you trap me here," I said, mustering all the courage I could find. "I'm leaving this place, and you can't stop me." The creature's grin widened even further, if that was possible. "Oh, my dear," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Who said anything about letting you leave?" With that, he lunged towards me, his form shifting and growing into something monstrous and indescribable. I turned and ran, crashing through the nearest door, desperate to escape the horrors that pursued me. I burst out of the haunted house, my lungs burning as I gasped for air. The park around me had transformed completely. The rides, once still and silent, now whirled and spun with impossible speed, occupied by shadowy figures that laughed and screamed with inhuman voices. Behind me, I could hear the creature that had once been the ticket booth man, its monstrous form crashing through the haunted house in pursuit. I ran blindly, no longer caring about direction, focused only on putting as much distance as possible between myself and that thing. The ground beneath my feet seemed to shift and change with each step. One moment I was running on pavement, the next on grass, then on what felt like spongy flesh that pulsed beneath my shoes. The air was filled with a cacophony of carnival music, distorted and playing backwards, mixed with the wails and laughter of unseen entities. I dodged between rides that reached out with mechanical arms, trying to grab me. The carousel horses had come to life, their eyes glowing red as they galloped in pursuit, freed from their poles. The Ferris wheel spun so fast it was just a blur, creating a wind that nearly knocked me off my feet. "You can't escape," the creature's voice boomed from everywhere at once. "Twilight Park has claimed you." I spotted the park's entrance in the distance, the gates now twisting and writhing like living metal. It was my only chance. I sprinted towards it, my legs burning with the effort. Suddenly, the ground opened up beneath me, and I found myself falling into darkness. I landed hard on what felt like a slide, twisting and turning through pitch blackness. I could hear the creature's laughter echoing all around me. The slide deposited me roughly onto the ground, and I looked up to find myself back at the center of the park. The monstrous form of the creature loomed over me, its body a constantly shifting mass of shadows and nightmares. "Give up," it hissed. "Become part of Twilight Park forever." But as it reached for me, I spotted something, a shard of mirror from the haunted house, lying on the ground nearby. In its reflection, I saw not the twisted version of the park, but the real world beyond. Acting on instinct, I grabbed the shard, ignoring the pain as it cut into my hand. I held it up, and the creature recoiled as if burned by the sight of reality reflected in the glass. "No," it shrieked. "You can't." But I could. Holding the mirror shard before me like a shield, I began to back away towards the entrance. The park's illusions seemed to waver and break wherever the reflection touched them. With the creature's howls of rage echoing behind me, I ran for the gates, clutching my key to reality, praying it would be enough to let me escape this nightmare. With every ounce of strength left in my body, I sprinted towards the gates, the mirror shard held out before me like a talisman. The park around me warped and twisted, reality and nightmare blending in a nauseating swirl. The creature's howls grew more desperate, more enraged with each step I took towards freedom. Just as I reached the gates, I felt something grab my ankle. I looked down to see a tendril of darkness wrapping around my leg, trying to pull me back into the park's grasp. Panic surged through me as I struggled to break free. "You belong to us now," the creature's voice boomed, seeming to come from everywhere at once. In a moment of desperate inspiration, I turned the mirror shard, reflecting the gate's image onto the tendril. It recoiled as if burned, disappearing into wisps of smoke. Without hesitation, I hurled myself through the gates, tumbling onto the cracked asphalt of the parking lot beyond. As I hit the ground, I heard an otherworldly shriek behind me. I turned to see the creature, now a mass of writhing shadows, trapped behind the gate. Its form seemed to be dissolving, unable to exist outside the boundaries of Twilight Park. "This isn't over," it hissed, its voice fading. "Twilight Park will be waiting. Always waiting." Then, in a blink, it was gone. The park behind the gate looked ordinary once more, albeit abandoned and decrepit. But I knew the truth of what lurked within. I don't know how long I sat there in the parking lot, shaking and trying to process what had happened. When I finally gathered the courage to look back, Twilight Park appeared as it had when I first arrived, an abandoned, forgotten place. But I knew better now. I knew the horrors that lurked just beneath the surface, waiting for unsuspecting visitors to fall into their trap. In the months since that night, I've tried to convince myself it was all a hallucination, a vivid nightmare brought on by stress or an overactive imagination. But the scar on my hand from the mirror shard serves as a constant reminder of the truth. I've never returned to Twilight Park, and I go out of my way to avoid even passing near it. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I can hear distant carnival music on the wind, or catch a glimpse of colorful lights in the corner of my eye. In those moments, I know that Twilight Park is still out there, still hungry, still waiting. And I wonder, how many others have stumbled into its supernatural trap? How many have never found their way out? One thing's for certain, I'll never look at an amusement park the same way again. I've always been drawn to the unusual, the unexplained. Perhaps it was growing up in a small town where nothing ever happened that fueled my curiosity for the extraordinary. But nothing in my 23 years of life could have prepared me for what I experienced 6 months ago at Enigma Park. Those summer nights changed me forever, leaving me questioning the very nature of reality itself. It was a sweltering June evening when I first set foot in Enigma Park as its newest night security guard. The fading sunlight cast long shadows across the deserted fairgrounds, transforming cheerful carousel horses into ominous silhouettes. I clutched my newly issued flashlight, its weight a comforting reminder of my purpose here. "Welcome aboard, kid," growled Mr. Hernandez, the head of security, as he handed me a ring of jangling keys. "Your job's simple. Make your rounds, check the locks, and report anything suspicious. And whatever you do, don't go poking around where you shouldn't." I nodded, trying to look more confident than I felt. The job seemed straightforward enough, a perfect way to earn some extra cash before heading back to college in the fall. Plus, how hard could it be to watch over an empty amusement park? As Mr. Hernandez gave me a quick tour, I couldn't shake the feeling that the park was watching me back. The Ferris wheel creaked in the warm breeze, and I could have sworn I saw a flash of movement in the funhouse windows. But I chalked it up to nerves and an overactive imagination. "Any questions?" Mr. Hernandez asked as we completed the tour. "Just one," I replied. "What's the deal with the House of Mirrors? It looks different from the other attractions." Mr. Hernandez's face darkened. "That old thing. It's been here longer than any of us. Best to leave it alone during your rounds. Some of the other guards say it gives them the creeps." With that cryptic warning, he left me to begin my first shift. As the park's lights flickered to life against the darkening sky, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. Little did I know, those feelings were just the beginning of a nightmare I couldn't have imagined in my wildest dreams. The first few weeks passed without incident. I quickly fell into a routine, my footsteps echoing through the empty park as I made my rounds. The initial unease I felt gave way to a sense of familiarity, even comfort. The silent rides and shuttered game booths became my nightly companions. But as July wore on, subtle changes began to creep in. It started with whispers of wind that seemed to carry fragments of laughter or distant music. I'd turn, heart racing, only to find nothing but shadows and stillness. Then came the odd reflections. Passing by the funhouse or carnival game mirrors, I'd catch glimpses of movement that didn't quite match my own. A hand raised when mine was lowered, a head turned when I was looking straight ahead. Each time, I'd blink, and everything would be normal again. I tried to rationalize these occurrences. The wind was just the ocean breeze carrying sounds from nearby neighborhoods. The strange reflections were tricks of light, fatigue playing havoc with my perception. But deep down, a growing sense of unease took root. One attraction, in particular, began to dominate my thoughts: the House of Mirrors. Unlike the other rides that seemed to slumber peacefully at night, the House of Mirrors felt alive, watching, waiting. Each time I passed it on my rounds, the air grew thick and heavy, as if the very atmosphere was pressing in around me. I remembered Mr. Hernandez's warning and tried to push my curiosity aside. But as the days went by, the pull of the House of Mirrors grew stronger. Little did I know, my routine was about to be shattered, plunging me into a nightmare that would challenge everything I thought I knew about reality. It was during my third week when things took a decidedly sinister turn. I was making my usual rounds, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness, when I heard it, a faint whisper coming from the direction of the House of Mirrors. At first, I dismissed it as the wind playing tricks on my ears. But as I approached the attraction, the whispers grew clearer, more insistent. They seemed to be calling my name. "Hello," I called out, my voice embarrassingly shaky. "Is someone there?" No response came, save for the continued whispers that now seemed to emanate from within the House of Mirrors itself. I shone my flashlight through the entrance, but the beam was swallowed by the darkness inside. For the rest of that night, I gave the House of Mirrors a wide berth, trying to convince myself that I was just overtired, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But each time I passed by, the whispers returned, growing louder and more distinct with each round. Over the next few nights, the phenomenon intensified. The whispers began to form words, phrases that I could almost understand. They spoke of secrets, of hidden truths, of a world beyond the mirrors. And always, they called my name. I found myself standing in front of the House of Mirrors more and more often, straining to make out the words. My rational mind screamed at me to report this to Mr. Hernandez, to ask for a different assignment. But a growing part of me was captivated by the mystery, drawn to the promises those whispers seemed to hold. Sleep became elusive. Even during the day, I found myself obsessing over the House of Mirrors and its secrets. I scoured the internet for information about the attraction's history, but found nothing unusual. It was just another fun house in just another amusement park. Or so it seemed. As the week drew to a close, I knew I was reaching a breaking point. I couldn't go on like this, jumping at shadows and whispers. I had to confront whatever was in the House of Mirrors, had to know the truth. Little did I realize, my decision would plunge me into a nightmare beyond imagination. Friday night arrived, and with it, a sense of grim determination. I had spent the day preparing myself, both mentally and physically. I brought extra batteries for my flashlight, a small notebook to record any findings, and even a small camera. Part of me felt ridiculous. What did I expect to find in an old funhouse attraction? But the whispers had become too insistent to ignore. As I began my shift, the park seemed different. The usual creaks and groans of settling metal were muted, as if the entire park was holding its breath in anticipation. The air felt thick, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. I made my rounds as usual, my heart pounding harder with each step that brought me closer to the House of Mirrors. When I finally stood before it, the whispers erupted into a cacophony of voices, all calling out to me at once. Taking a deep breath, I flicked on my flashlight and stepped inside. The entrance corridor was lined with warped mirrors, my reflection distorting in grotesque ways as I moved past. But it was more than just funhouse distortions. I could have sworn I saw my reflections moving independently, beckoning me deeper into the attraction. The air grew colder as I ventured further in, my breath misting in front of me. The whispers surrounded me now, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I tried to focus, to make out individual words or phrases, but they remained just on the edge of comprehension. Suddenly, I found myself in a circular room, surrounded by mirrors on all sides. My flashlight beam bounced off the reflective surfaces, creating a dizzying array of light and shadow. And in each mirror, I saw myself, but not quite myself. Each reflection seemed slightly off, with subtle differences in posture, expression, even clothing. As I stood there, heart racing, I realized I had crossed a threshold. There was no going back now. Whatever secrets the House of Mirrors held, I was determined to uncover them. With shaking hands, I raised my camera and began to document my surroundings, unaware that I was about to embark on the most terrifying journey of my life. As I ventured deeper into the House of Mirrors, reality seemed to warp around me. The circular room gave way to a maze of corridors, each lined with mirrors that reflected impossibilities. In one, I saw myself as a child, wide-eyed and innocent. In another, an elderly version of me stared back, his eyes filled with a lifetime of regrets. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, echoing off the mirrors in a disorienting chorus. I tried to focus on finding my way through the labyrinth, but every turn led to another identical corridor. My flashlight beam danced erratically across the surfaces, casting shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. Suddenly, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. I whirled around, heart pounding, to see my reflection grinning back at me. But I wasn't grinning. The reflection raised its hand in a mocking wave, and to my horror, I realized it was moving independently of me. Panic rising in my throat, I stumbled backward, only to collide with another mirror. I turned to find this reflection sneering at me, its eyes cold and malevolent. More movement caught my attention, and I saw that in every mirror, my reflections were coming to life, each one a slightly different version of myself. I ran, no longer caring about investigating or uncovering secrets. All I wanted was to find the exit, to escape this nightmare. But the corridors twisted and turned, defying logic and architecture. I found myself in rooms that shouldn't exist, witnessing scenes from my past, present, and possible futures played out before me in the endless mirrors. In one mirror, I saw myself accepting a prestigious award. In another, I was behind bars, despair etched on my face. Each reflection seemed to represent a different path my life could take, a different version of who I could become. As I ran, the whispers crescendoed into a roar, and I could finally understand their words. "Choose," they demanded. "Choose who you will become." But I didn't want to choose. I just wanted to escape. With each turn, the corridors grew narrower, the mirrors pressing in closer. My reflections reached out, their hands seemingly able to breach the glass, grasping at me with cold, spectral fingers. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, I burst through a door and found myself in a circular room much like the one I had entered. But this one was different. At its center stood an ornate, antique mirror, its frame carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Unlike the other mirrors, this one didn't show my reflection. Instead, its surface swirled with a dark, smoky substance. As I approached, drawn by an inexplicable force, I realized that this mirror was the heart of the labyrinth, the source of the whispers and the key to understanding what was happening to me. I stood before the ancient mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. The swirling darkness within seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and I could feel its pull on me, like a gravitational force. The whispers had died down to a low, expectant hum. As I gazed into the mirror, the smoke began to clear, revealing not my reflection, but a scene I can only describe as nightmarish. I saw a version of myself, but twisted, wrong. This doppelganger had my face, my body, but its eyes were completely black, devoid of any humanity. A malevolent grin spread across its face as it noticed me watching. "Finally, you've arrived," it spoke, its voice a chilling echo of my own. "We've been waiting for you." I stumbled back, nearly falling in my shock. What are you?" I managed to stammer. The thing in the mirror laughed, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. "I'm you," it said. "Or rather, I'm what you could become. What you will become once you accept your true nature." I shook my head, trying to deny what I was seeing and hearing. But deep down, I felt a flicker of recognition. This twisted version of myself represented all the darker impulses I'd ever felt, all the selfish thoughts and cruel intentions I'd pushed aside. "You don't belong out there," it continued, gesturing to the world beyond the House of Mirrors. "You belong here, with us. In a world where every possibility exists simultaneously, where you can be everything you've ever dreamed of, and everything you've ever feared." As it spoke, the other mirrors in the room came to life. Each one showed a different version of myself, some noble and heroic, others despicable and horrifying. I saw myself as a celebrated artist, a ruthless dictator, a beloved teacher, a serial killer. Every potential version of me, good and bad, all existing at once. "All you have to do," my dark reflection said, reaching out its hand as if to breach the mirror's surface, "is let go. Let go of your singular reality and embrace the infinite." For a moment, I felt tempted. The promise of unlimited potential, of escaping the constraints of my ordinary life, was alluring. But as the dark reflection's hand began to emerge from the mirror, its cold fingers reaching for me, I snapped out of my trance. This was wrong. Unnatural. Whatever this place was, whatever these reflections were, I knew I had to escape. With a cry of defiance, I turned and ran, plunging back into the maze of mirrors, desperate to find a way out before it was too late. My heart pounded in my ears as I fled through the twisting corridors of the House of Mirrors. Behind me, I could hear the enraged howls of my reflections, their voices a cacophony of my own distorted screams. The maze seemed to shift and change with each turn, corridors stretching impossibly long or ending abruptly in dead ends. Every mirror I passed now showed a nightmarish version of myself, reaching out with grasping hands that seemed to phase through the glass. I felt phantom touches on my skin, cold fingers trying to pull me into their world. I swatted them away, my panic rising with each step. "You can't escape us." My voices echoed from every direction. "We are you. Accept us." I refused to listen, focused solely on finding a way out. But the exit remained elusive, and I found myself passing the same landmarks over and over again. It was as if the House of Mirrors itself was alive, toying with me, trying to break my will. My lungs burned, and my legs ached, but I didn't dare stop. I could feel the malevolent presence from the ancient mirror growing stronger, its influence seeping through the entire labyrinth. The air grew thick and heavy, making each breath a struggle. In my desperation, I began to smash at the mirrors with my flashlight, hoping to break through to the outside world. But each shattered mirror only revealed another behind it, an endless recursion of reflective surfaces. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I spotted something different, a mirror that didn't reflect the maze, but showed the night sky and the silhouette of the Ferris wheel. The exit. With a surge of adrenaline, I sprinted towards it, my dark reflections howling in fury as they realized I was about to escape. As I reached the mirror, I felt resistance, as if I was trying to push through a membrane. The surface rippled and distorted, but I pushed harder, feeling it give way inch by inch. With a final, desperate lunge, I burst through the mirror and tumbled out onto the grass outside the House of Mirrors. I lay on the cool grass, gasping for air, my mind reeling from what I'd just experienced. The night air felt blessedly normal against my skin, and I could hear the distant sound of traffic from beyond the park's walls. I was out. I was safe. Or was I? As I slowly sat up, I noticed something was off. The park around me seemed different. The colors were slightly muted, the shadows a bit deeper than they should be. And when I looked at my hands, I saw with horror that they seemed slightly translucent, as if I wasn't fully present in this reality. I scrambled to my feet, stumbling towards the park's exit. Everything looked normal at first glance, but the more I observed, the more wrong it all felt. The Ferris wheel's lights flickered in an unnatural pattern, and I could have sworn I saw figures moving in the shadows between the attractions. As I reached the main gate, I hesitated. What if this wasn't my world at all? What if I had escaped into another reality, one just slightly off-kilter from my own? But I couldn't go back to the House of Mirrors. The thought of facing those reflections again, of confronting that ancient, evil mirror, filled me with dread. With a deep breath, I pushed through the gate and out into the city beyond. The streets were familiar, yet strange. People walked by, but their faces seemed blurred, indistinct. Cars passed, but their engines sounded muffled, as if coming from a great distance. I made my way home in a daze, questioning every sight and sound. As I finally reached my apartment and locked the door behind me, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. For a split second, I saw not my own reflection, but the grinning face of my dark doppelganger, its black eyes gleaming with triumph. I blinked, and it was gone. But I knew, with chilling certainty, that my ordeal was far from over. Whatever had happened in the House of Mirrors had changed me, perhaps irrevocably, and I feared that the boundary between my world and the world of reflections had become irrevocably blurred. The days following my escape from the House of Mirrors were a blur of paranoia and confusion. I called in sick to work, unable to face the thought of returning to Enigma Park. My apartment became my sanctuary and my prison, a place where I could hide from the world but not from my own fractured perceptions. Every reflective surface became a potential threat. I covered all the mirrors in my apartment with sheets, unable to trust what I might see in them. Even the darkened screen of my turned-off television made me jumpy, as if at any moment it might flicker to life and show me that grinning, dark-eyed version of myself. Sleep eluded me. When I did manage to drift off, my dreams were plagued by endless corridors of mirrors and the echoing whispers of my own voice. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, unsure of whether I was truly awake or still trapped in some nightmarish reflection of reality. The world outside my apartment felt increasingly alien. Colors seemed off, sounds muffled or distorted. People's faces would sometimes blur or shift when I looked at them too long, as if they were struggling to maintain their form in this reality. I began to question everything I saw and heard, unsure if I was experiencing the real world or some warped version of it. After a week of self-imposed isolation, I finally worked up the courage to call Mr. Hernandez and quit my job at Enigma Park. His response chilled me to the bone. "Kid, we've been trying to reach you for days," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "You never showed up for your shift last Friday, and no one's seen you since. Are you okay?" I felt the blood drain from my face. Last Friday. But that was the night I entered the House of Mirrors. How could an entire week have passed in what felt like a single night? Mumbling some excuse about a family emergency, I hung up and sank to the floor, my mind reeling. Had I lost time? Or had I spent a week trapped in that mirror dimension, only to escape into a world where barely any time had passed? The uncertainty gnawed at me, eroding my grip on reality. I found myself constantly checking my phone, my watch, any timepiece I could find, terrified of losing more time or discovering that time was moving differently for me than for the rest of the world. In moments of clarity, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Perhaps it had all been a vivid hallucination, brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But then I'd catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision, or hear a faint whisper that sounded disturbingly like my own voice, and all attempts at rationalization would crumble. I knew I needed help, but who would believe me? How could I explain what had happened without sounding completely insane? The isolation deepened, and with it, my fear that perhaps I had never truly escaped the House of Mirrors at all. 6 months have passed since that fateful night in the House of Mirrors, and I'm still struggling to make sense of what happened. I've tried to move on, to rebuild some semblance of a normal life, but the experience has left an indelible mark on my psyche. I eventually found a therapist who, while skeptical of the supernatural elements of my story, has been helping me work through the trauma. She suggests that what I experienced might have been a vivid stress-induced hallucination or a manifestation of deep-seated psychological issues. Part of me wants to believe her, to accept a rational explanation that would allow me to put this all behind me. But I know what I saw, what I felt. The terror in the House of Mirrors was too real, the consequences too lasting to be dismissed as mere hallucination. I still see things sometimes, flickers of movement in reflective surfaces, brief distortions in reality that no one else seems to notice. Are they residual effects of my experience, or signs that the boundary between worlds remains thin? I've done research into the history of Enigma Park and the House of Mirrors, hoping to find some explanation for what happened. But there's nothing, no reports of similar incidents, no dark history that might account for what I experienced. It's as if the House of Mirrors exists in a blind spot, invisible to the rest of the world. Sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if I'm still trapped in there, living out some elaborate illusion while my true self remains captive in that maze of reflections. Other times, I fear that I might not be the original me at all, but one of those reflections that managed to escape into the real world. These thoughts paralyze me with existential dread. How can I trust my own perceptions? How can I be sure of my own identity? But I can't live in fear forever. I'm trying to move forward, to reclaim my life. I've started looking for a new job, far away from any amusement parks or houses of mirrors. I'm reconnecting with friends and family, anchoring myself in the relationships that define who I am. Yet, even as I write these words, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, in a dimension of endless reflections, another version of me is writing the same thing, questioning its own existence. And I wonder, with a chill running down my spine, which one of us is the real reflection? To hear more stories like this, subscribe and leave a like.